Welcome to Early Indicators. This is episode 8 in our January domain on geopolitical realignments, and today we explore the rise of parallel institutions, alternative banks, forums, and development models. This episode looks beneath the surface of global headlines to examine the quieter shifts in how nations organize cooperation, finance development, and negotiate influence. These are not momentary disruptions. They are long-forming patterns that reveal how the world is reorganizing itself through new institutional architecture. Historical context: how we reached this moment. For much of the post-war era, global governance revolved around a familiar set of Western-led institutions. The IMF shaped stabilization policy. The World Bank financed development. The WTO governed trade. The OECD influenced regulatory norms. These institutions were built for a world with fewer major economic centers, simpler supply chains, and a more concentrated distribution of capital. But over the last 40 to 50 years, the global landscape has changed dramatically. Emerging economies grew into major financial actors. South-South trade expanded. Regional blocs matured. Digital infrastructure created new forms of interdependence. And many countries grew frustrated with lending conditions, slow approval cycles, and governance structures that did not reflect their economic weight. The 2000s marked the beginning of a new phase. Regional development banks expanded their mandates. Sovereign wealth funds became global investors. Currency swap lines emerged as alternative safety nets. The 2010s accelerated the trend with the creation of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the New Development Bank, and a wave of regional financing mechanisms across Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. The current moment represents a decisive shift. These parallel institutions are no longer peripheral, they are becoming central to how nations pursue development, manage risk, and build influence. They reshape the financial landscape by offering new sources of capital, new governance models, and new pathways for cooperation. They alter long-term trajectories by reducing reliance on legacy institutions and enabling countries to diversify their strategic options. They expose vulnerabilities in systems that depend on a single institutional architecture while strengthening resilience through a more distributed ecosystem of lenders, forums, and regulatory platforms. This theme fits the January domain because geopolitical realignments increasingly manifest through institutional design. Power is no longer expressed solely through alliances or trade agreements, it is embedded in who sets the rules, who finances infrastructure, and who defines the standards for digital commerce, climate adaptation, and cross-border investment. Current signals: what's emerging right now? Several developments, quiet, steady, and often overlooked, show that parallel institutions are expanding their reach. Regional development banks are scaling up lending for infrastructure, energy transition, and digital connectivity. Their financing models often emphasize speed, flexibility, and fewer political conditions, making them attractive to countries seeking alternatives to traditional lenders. New financial safety nets are emerging through regional currency swap arrangements, reducing reliance on IMF emergency programs and giving countries more autonomy during crises. Alternative trade forums are setting their own standards for digital commerce, supply chain transparency, and environmental compliance. These forums are shaping norms that may eventually rival or replace those of the WTO. South-South investment platforms are enabling capital flows between emerging economies without Western intermediaries, creating new financial corridors and strengthening regional integration. Parallel dispute resolution mechanisms are being developed for trade, investment, and digital governance, signaling a long-term shift in how economic conflicts will be managed. Climate financing institutions outside traditional frameworks are offering new pathways for adaptation and mitigation funding, often with governance structures that reflect regional priorities rather than global hierarchies. These signals matter because they reveal a world where institutional authority is dispersing. Influence is no longer concentrated in a handful of organizations, it is distributed across a growing constellation of regional and thematic platforms. This diversification reshapes global governance, alters the balance of power, and creates new opportunities for countries to pursue development on their own terms. Signal strength, accelerating. We will take a quick break and return with case studies. Welcome back to Early Indicators, Episode 8, in our January domain on geopolitical realignments and the theme of the rise of parallel institutions, alternative banks, forums, and development models. In this second half, we move from broad patterns to concrete examples, places where the shift toward parallel institutions is most visible and where its consequences are already unfolding. Case studies, where the shift is most visible. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, with more than 100 member countries and a rapidly expanding project portfolio, the AIIB has become a major force in global infrastructure finance. Its governance structure, lending speed, and regional focus demonstrate how new institutions can gain legitimacy and scale in a short period of time. The new Development Bank, NDB, created by BRICS nations, the NDB provides loans in local currencies, reducing exposure to dollar-denominated debt and offering a development model that reflects the priorities of emerging economies. Its expansion into new sectors, renewables, digital infrastructure, and climate resilience, signals a broader shift in global financing norms. Africa's regional financing mechanisms, institutions such as the African Export-Import Bank and the Africa Finance Corporation are strengthening intra-African trade, supporting industrialization, and reducing reliance on external lenders. Their role in implementing the African Continental Free Trade Area highlights how regional institutions can drive structural transformation. Latin America's digital governance forums. Regional coalitions are developing their own standards for data flows, cybersecurity, and digital commerce. These forums are shaping the rules of the digital economy in ways that reflect local priorities rather than external models. Implications: why this matters. For nations, the rise of parallel institutions expands strategic options. Countries can diversify their financing sources, negotiate from a position of greater autonomy, and pursue development pathways that align with their domestic priorities. For cities, these institutions influence infrastructure investment, climate adaptation funding, and digital modernization. For firms, they reshape financing opportunities, regulatory exposure, and market access. For communities, they affect job creation, energy access, and resilience to economic shocks. At the macro layer, global governance becomes more pluralistic. Instead of a single hierarchy of institutions, the world is moving toward a multi-node ecosystem where different regions set their own standards and priorities. At the micro layer, specific ports, industrial zones, and digital corridors benefit from new funding streams and new governance models. This shift reveals vulnerabilities in legacy institutions that struggle to adapt to new economic realities, while highlighting the resilience of diversified governance ecosystems that reflect regional needs and emerging priorities. Future expectations/projections, where this is heading. Short term, 1 to 3 years, expect more regional financing tools, expanded membership in alternative banks, and new forums focused on digital trade, climate resilience, and supply chain security. Countries will increasingly use these institutions to hedge against geopolitical uncertainty. Medium term, 3 to 10 years, parallel institutions will develop their own standards, lending norms, and dispute resolution systems. Regional blocs will rely on them for strategic projects, from energy transition to digital infrastructure. Competing governance models will coexist, sometimes cooperating, sometimes competing. Long term, 10+ years. The global order will resemble a network of overlapping institutions rather than a single hierarchy. Influence will flow through multiple channels: financial, regulatory, digital, and environmental. The institutions that define the next century may not be the ones that dominated the last. Early indicators to watch include new capital injections into regional banks, cross-regional institutional partnerships, climate-focused financing mechanisms, and alternative trade forums. What to watch next: track how emerging institutions coordinate, or collide, with legacy systems. Their interactions will shape the next phase of global governance. In summary, this episode explored how parallel institutions are rising alongside traditional Western-led systems, reshaping global governance through new banks, forums, and development models. These shifts reveal a world where institutional authority is dispersing and where regions are building their own pathways to influence. Thank you for listening to Early Indicators. Please like, subscribe, and share the podcast. This episode draws on publicly available information, including international think tank reports, academic research, public economic and demographic data, open-source intelligence, and non-copyrighted summaries. This episode is for informational and educational purposes only. It does not constitute political advice, financial guidance, or predictive certainty.